Cognitive therapists believe in changing clients' inaccurate perceptions of themselves and their environments by uncovering faulty beliefs that are causing personal and interpersonal problems. Coming from the behavioral tradition, cognitive therapists believe thoughts can be considered behaviors which can be modified. Such modification occurs through the disputation of thoughts and by experimenting with new behaviors. Many cognitive therapists believe that problems in living are caused by cognitive schemas or floor plans that influence how people make sense of the world. Once these cognitive schemas have been identified, the therapist helps the client uncover the moment-to-moment automatic thoughts that fuel the continuation of the schema. The counselor then helps the client discover the cognitive errors in these automatic thoughts. Examples of just a few of these include all or nothing thinking, such as believing that life is either great or horrible, overgeneralization, such as believing that one must be fearful of flying because planes have crashed, and personalization, or seeing oneself as the cause of negative events, such as believing that one was the reason for his or her parents' divorce. Today, most cognitive therapists believe in establishing a therapeutic alliance through careful listening and by collaborating with the client as they help him or her understand the cognitive therapy process. Cognitive therapists use questions to probe the client's way of thinking. Eventually, therapists help the client acquire more adaptive thoughts and assist the client in devising a plan that includes practicing new behaviors that will reinforce new thoughts. Cognitive therapists believe clients can make dramatic changes in how they think and act. However, they tend to focus on coping, not curing the client. Changing embedded ways of thinking and behaving does not occur easily. Let's see how Dr. Garrett McAuliffe helps Karen identify cognitive distortions as she works on issues related to how fear of loss has led her to avoid commitments in her life.
Karen, hi again.
Hi.
We met once before and we talked about your fear of loss and how it connects to your fear of commitment at this time in your life. I asked you to monitor some thoughts you might have had around specific incidents in your relationship and write down those thoughts when you felt a sense of dread about the current relationship you're in with John, your partner. What have you noticed this week?
I did try to think about my thoughts, and one example I was remembering as I was driving over here was when John made reference to the fact that I don't clean out the refrigerator, that I don't worry about that as something that I need to do. And I remember thinking the feelings that came up were like, see, I'm not good at everything. I don't do the refrigerator. Things like that he's not going to like. It's going to negatively affect the relationship. And I mean, it just led from one thing to another, and that feeling came back, that the relationship will somehow end. It's just kind of all builds together.
How likely is that to be true?
Well, based on just the refrigerator incident, probably not very likely. And I know that, but somehow those little things just build up, and that fear feeling comes up when they happen.
So you generalize from before.
Yes.
You've lost a father when you were very young, and a little brother when you were quite young, and we talked last week, and your stepfather when you were an adolescent, and then your older brother in your life. And so those are genuine losses that have happened to you. But what's different about this relationship?
That's where I get confused, because I know that this relationship is different. But the feelings of loss that come up just remind me that I don't want to have to experience that again. So I know it's different, but I don't want to experience loss again.
You're afraid of feeling that pain again. You're saying to yourself on some deep level, every time I get close, I'll experience loss. Every time there's a problem, things will end. Is it true that every time there's a problem, you will experience loss?
Well, not every time. I mean, you know, he could die, but not every time, no.
Right. Relationships do end, but not every time that there's a minor problem. You are generalizing, and that's one word you can use, overgeneralizing from the past. And another word that maybe you can remember is catastrophizing from those situations as if they're the same as the current one. Do you see how you're doing this?
Yes. Yes. Because every time there's that little problem, I get that pain. So, yeah.
So that pain's a cue for you, and then you start worrying. The pain comes from deeply embedded, now maladaptive thoughts that really maybe were adaptive at the time but aren't anymore. There's a word for that. It's called a cognitive schema, or a cognitive floor plan that you're operating from, as if it's true for now what was true then. You're saying to yourself, if there's any problem, then a relationship's going to end.
Yes.
It's so embedded that you don't catch the thoughts in the present as if they're different now. But you still can combat them.
How?
With new, more adaptive thoughts. Not maladaptive thoughts, but not generalizing like you're doing or catastrophizing. What type of thoughts do you think that you can have now?
Well, I guess when that feeling comes up, I know that I can say, you know, that this relationship is different and that we can talk about things. And I know that John's not going to leave me. I feel very confident about that, like I said, other than if he dies. And he's willing to work with me, so I know I have to just say those things.
Good. Then let's work on what I'll call a homework assignment.
Okay.
Is that okay with you?
Yes, I want to work on it.
What situation with John might bring up these thoughts?
It'll probably be some complaint about the dog.
And what will you say differently to yourself?
I will try to remember and say, you know, we can talk about this. He's not going to leave. And just because we have a disagreement over the dog doesn't mean that it's going to lead to a loss, I guess.
Great. You're reminding yourself not to catastrophize.
Right.
That this relationship is different from all of those other experiences in the past. And one thing I think it's important to remember is how long did it take to develop this fear of loss, this floor plan?
Well, my dad died when I was 3, so my whole lifetime.
Right. So it's going to take some hard work to combat these embedded, we'll call them, thoughts. Your cognitive floor plan is going to have to slowly change.
Right. I see. I'm really going to have to work on this.
I have a suggestion. I'd like you to write down every incident that brings up those thoughts, and then how you combated each incident with the new thoughts that we talked about today. Is that something you think you can do?
Yes. Yes, I can do that.
Great. I look forward to seeing how you do it.
Thank you. It's going to take a lot of work.
Okay.
Well, Garrett, I was really impressed with your work with Karen, and I was really intrigued with the whole notion of cognitive floor plan, cognitive schema, floor plan, and I was thinking we all must have floor plans, but some of them become maladaptive, and some of them don't. And I was wondering what your thoughts on that. Why one person ends up having a cognitive schema that is maladaptive and someone else is healthy?
And some of that may not be terribly important in terms of the therapy and the counseling. The fact is that for some people at a critical time in their lives, an incident occurs and they make sense of it. They make meaning at a time in a way that works. And for that point in their life, that logic flows. That logic gets held and stuck and then gets generalized to later times. So it's really a process of a kind of an old tape. And if you look back at it, you can see its logic.
Right.
But when you look at it in present tense, the logic no longer holds.
Okay. I guess one of the major differences between this type of therapy and a more deterministic approach, like Freud's approach, is that you believe that the person can change their way of viewing the world.
Yes, respecting a person's learning history, as the behavioral tradition describes the past as important,
Right.
but as a learning history that is only one version of learning. And therefore, learning can be changed with new learning.
So again, I guess I'm hearing that in contrast to more of a psychoanalytic approach, this can happen more quickly, whereas in psychoanalysis you're talking about years of treatment.
Yeah, quick may not be, we don't want to overstate quick.
Right.
We don't want to underestimate the difficulty it is for people's lives to change. Cognitive behavioral counseling does recognize, A, how embedded schemas and patterns of thoughts are. They also recognize the emotional piece of, this isn't all cognitive in a certain way. If you think cognitive means thinking, it means the whole meaning making that includes emotional life.
Okay. So it's much broader than just the thinking process. I think sometimes we get caught up in thinking that cognitive therapy is just the thinking process.
No, and you'll notice in the session with Karen, we talk about the pain she feels when those moments occur in the present. And a lot of times you want to capture that painful moment as a cue for the thoughts that either preceded it or followed it. And in a session, you literally will try to capture moments like that by, in fact, when a person shows body language that might be expressing that painful emotion, you might say, what are you thinking right now? So you use the present and the experiential dimension. It's not all head work, which I think could be some of the illusions people have about cognitive counseling.
Which makes me think about the relationship and how, and if it's not just all a thinking process, how important is building the relationship with the client so you can catch those moments?
In the past, behaviorists have been accused of not paying attention to the relationship. That has been significantly changed. The recognition is that the trust level, which is true in all helping relationships, must be established so that a person will buy into the counselor's interventions, believe in the credibility of the counselor, and be willing to participate in the relationship. The work on actually psychotherapy effectiveness has demonstrated that for all therapies, the relationship is a key element. And I say the reason is clients' belief and hope that come from those.
I see. The other thing I noticed is that you've been using the word behaviorist and cognitive almost interchangeably sometimes, and I was wondering if that was a slip, or is that because they're so intimately connected in some ways?
They are intimately connected, and they do come from the same tradition. And as behaviorism emphasized overt activity, body activity, there was a sense by some of the founders of the cognitive behavioral approach, meant CBT is abbreviation for cognitive behavioral therapy, that wasn't addressing the fact that we are, as human beings, thinking and feeling people, feeling creatures, and that, in fact, thoughts are behaviors. So given the fact that thoughts are behaviors, they can be changed, reinforced, and all the principles of behavioral behavioral modification can happen with thoughts as behaviors.
And yet I wonder if B.F. Skinner was looking over our shoulder right now, what he would be saying about that.
Right. He would, at the point in his own development that I think of him, still have significant objections to what's called going into the black box, the mysterious workings of the human thinking apparatus.
Well, I think you've brought a whole new dimension to my understanding of cognitive behavioral therapy, and I want to thank you for your fine work with Karen.
Good, thank you.